And we are back. Welcome to the SoapBox, where people who work, volunteer, and care about recovery tell us who they are and what they're most passionate about. My name is Rich Jones, RN, and I represent Parenting Your Child in Recovery.com and RestorativeLifeManagement.com, and the home website, secondstars.com. That's number 2NDSTARTS.com. Today, my guest is Mark Gilman. Mark Gilman is a harm reduction specialist out of the UK, and he's had an unusual journey in harm reduction. I think been around since the early parts of harm reduction in the UK. So, Mark, I want to thank you for coming on, being with us.
My pleasure, brother. Yeah, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about harm reduction over across the pond. So give us that Cliff Notes version of Mark, and tell us who you are and how you got to be, where you're at.
Sure thing, brother. Yeah. So I started personally self-medicating life at the very tender age of 12, following my father's untimely death. 11th of February 1969. I was alone with my father, mother at bingo, from a working class neighbourhood in Manchester, UK, and he had a brain hemorrhage, a stroke, and died. And basically, life changed from that moment on. So I, from being pretty much a straight A student, really, up till then, no brothers, no sisters. Mum and dad had met during the Second World War. My father was from the south of England, my mother from Manchester. And things were okay, and then everything literally changed, and I entered the world very, very early of drugs and crime and everything that goes along with that. And then, for the next 20, I managed to avoid what we call juvenile detention centre, prison for young people. At 16 by being sent to an alternative to custody arrangement, to a construction industry training board alternative to custody kind of arrangement. And I did that for a year, and then I left and really became a hippie. So
hippie.
Did the full hippie trail, man. Yeah. Ibiza in the Canary Islands, Morocco, India, Thailand, wow. the full hippie trail of the 70s. And then in 1980, I contracted amoebic dysentery, by which time I was 25. Anyway, I came back to the UK, very thin. And a friend of mine, actually a drug dealer, the truth of it, said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I'm certainly not going back anywhere where I can get amoebic dysentery, that's for certain." So he said, "What about university?" And I said, "Man, what are you talking about? People like us don't go to university. The only institutions we go to are prisons and mental institutions." Anyway, he said, "Listen," he said, "you've always been a big reader. That's my father's legacy. He taught me to read very early. Why don't you apply to university as what we called a mature student? So you didn't need regular qualifications. You could use your life experience." So I entered university at the age of 25 and absolutely loved it. Took to it like a duck to water, as we say, and I found higher education very easy. I initially trained to be a teacher in primary schools, so for young, because at the time there was a particular challenge. There were very few men in primary schools and very few male role models, and there was quite a lot of inner city challenges at the time, as indeed there is now.
Yeah.
So I did that for 2 years, which I enjoyed it with the children, but the staff room politics didn't really suit. So I switched to I did a first degree in organisation theory, and then I was advised to do a master's degree in what did you know best? Well, drugs and crime. We'll do criminology then. So I did that. And all the time of doing that, I was basically still using drugs and alcohol, sometimes in a dependent fashion, sometimes not, doing the usual thing. stopping, starting, getting obsessive about going to the gym and, bodybuilding, and then overeating and undereating and everything, it comes out whack-a-mole, put down the drugs, pick up the drink, put down the drink, pick up a knife and fork, put down the knife and fork, pick up a bookmaker's pencil, put down the bookmaker's pencil, pick up a dating site, etc., etc., etc. And I went to my first ever meeting of a 12-step mutual aid group in 1995. But I never stuck around. Back in Manchester in those days, the advice was, don't drink and go to meetings. Don't drink and go to meetings. So I didn't drink, and I went to meetings, and regularly went to 5 meetings in a day on a Saturday. And after a matter of months, I'd become suicidal, and I'd think, wow, this is no good. And so I'd start drinking and using again. And running in tandem with that, Rich, was the birth of the British harm reduction movement. Okay. Because what had happened in the early 1980s, we had an influx of brown powder heroin into the northwest of England in particular, and then eventually everywhere in the UK. And the brown powder heroin was very different to the heroin that you probably were familiar with, certainly on the east coast of the US, which tended to be white heroin, which came from, the Golden Triangle of Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, etc., Burma. And with that white heroin, you just needed to put water with it to inject it, or you could just sniff it. And for us, as working class drug users in Manchester, that was very rare, and if it did appear, incredibly expensive. So we really didn't have, the only access to opioids that we had was through what's known as the British system, whereby if you were very lucky, you could get heroin, diamorphine, from a doctor, which had became known as still is known as the British system, which began in 1926. So it's 100 years of 100 years this year of being able to get diamorphine heroin on prescription from your doctor, although it's very, very rare now. Anyway, but running in tandem with that, so when the brown powder heroin came, I remember I first saw it at a music festival in 1981. We used to run the crash tents, man, at the free festivals. And I remember somebody came in with this little bag of brown powder and was complaining bitterly that he put it in a joint and nothing had happened. And then somebody said, that you need to put that on a piece of foil and put a light underneath and inhale it. It's not, people thought it was some form of cannabis, but it wasn't, of course. It was heroin, brown heroin, and it's made for smoking, so it still has an oil base, whereas the white heroin has had the oil taken out. So it's made for smoking, so you can smoke it. And around then, so it was going for £5 per bag per unit. And to give you a perspective of what £5 in 1981, it would probably have bought you 4 cans of beer and maybe 20 cigarettes. So it was in that kind of Friday night, teenage, not pocket money, but that kind of what you'd expect to spend on a Friday, Saturday night. So lots of people, including myself and others, started to smoke it, thinking, this is great, no tolerance, or very little tolerance, but only to find out that also very quickly tolerance developed, and the £5 bag became a 10, became 20, became so on. And of course, as much as people said, I will never inject, I will never inject, I will only ever smoke it, when you're suddenly faced with finding that £20 and you know that £5 will go straight into a vein, people started to inject. So the harm reduction movement began in that context as a form of mutual aid. So
Okay.
if I could get some clean syringes, then I'd help you. If we couldn't, we'd clean them out with bleach, etc. And give each other advice. And then in Merseyside, I'm from Manchester, and 30 miles west is a city called Liverpool,
Okay.
home of the Beatles. And and despite the rivalry over soccer and one thing in music, Liverpool, to be fair, started first formal needle and syringe exchange programs with the support of the authorities and a public health specialist by the name of John Ashton. I think he's still alive. A guy called Alan Parry, Peter McDermott, who's still alive, and a doctor who's still alive called Dr. John Marks. And Dr. Marks decided, well, look, if we're providing clean syringes, but you're injecting dirty drugs,
Okay.
giving you clean syringes to inject dirty drugs, why don't we resurrect the British system and give you clean drugs to inject?
Okay.
So,
Mark.
So it began that way.
I want to take a quick break here and remind everybody, our listening audience, if you are a practitioner or frontline practitioner, and you I gotta clean this up in the repeat. Okay. RestorativeLifeManagement.com, helping frontline recovery practitioners and their client families with non-clinical programming that cuts through the friction of real life events and the detrimental effects of an unfocused support network. Okay. Okay, Mark. I want to ask you some questions about some of the things that you talked to me about and break down, and so you can get me better informed on this harm reduction and your thoughts on it. The first thing I want to ask you is this. You said the war between harm reduction and recovery is phony. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so all along the journey, people would decide that they wanted to quit altogether, that they wanted to go and pursue abstinence-based recovery. So if you looked at the pioneers of harm reduction, working class mutual aid-based harm reduction, many of them had either been in abstinence-based recovery and had fallen out of it, or had even gone back in. And there was never any real animosity. This idea that, I mean, some people would. I remember one guy saying he tried abstinence-based recovery, but now, because of what we would now call trauma, childhood trauma, indeed for myself, my father dying, my mother, used alcohol. Whether she was an alcoholic, I don't know, but she certainly dealt with her grief through alcohol and prescription medication. But there were other people in tandem who went off to residential rehabilitation centres and who pursued recovery, sometimes 12-step mutual aid, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, etc. And there was never any friction. It was okay okay, you can take life. I remember one guy, I just can't take life neat, man. But others can, And it seems to me that why I say it's a phony war is, I think there are a series of bad actors, if you will, on both sides of this.
Yeah.
Who, for whatever reason, whether it's pecuniary, i.e., they're making money out of it, or they're trying to, they have a particular political, philosophical, moral perspective, feel the need to, to declare war on the other side in order to justify their existence. I just don't accept it. Don't accept it. I don't experience it, because as much as I am, came into this industry sector world as a fundamental harm reductionist, I then became, many, many years later, the recovery champion for the British government.
Okay.
Well, for the English government, sorry, the Scottish people wouldn't appreciate me saying that, because we have.
Okay.
So I became the national recovery champion for Public Health England, which was, I think I was the highest ranking civil servant with the recovery in his title.
Okay.
From 2010 to 2015. And there was no contradiction in that. That was seen to be, to give people a choice.
Right.
Lay out the range of options for people and then give them a choice. And then medication assisted recovery. I remember speaking to William White at the time. In fact, I was interviewed by William White, author of Slaying the Dragon, A History of Mutual Aid. And I think in that interview, I'm pretty sure in that interview, he, like I, was saying, why is there a need for people to want to have this war between, at the end of the day, it's all about keeping people alive first and foremost.
Right.
There's no recovery in a graveyard.
Exactly.
Let's keep people alive. First, job one, keep people alive. Job two, try and keep them free of any bloodborne viruses. Job three, keep them at liberty, keep them out of prison, and then onwards, and then improve the quality of life and allow them to get a job. And in Public Health England, my mantra as the recovery champion was three things. Recovery is dependent on three things. Jobs, friends, and houses. Somewhere to live, somebody to love, and something to do.
Okay.
Jobs, friends, and houses.
That makes that makes perfect sense. And so your idea, and this is a little problem that I think we definitely have over here too, that war between the two. So in your view, then medication is as just as good in a harm reduction viewpoint as abstinence.
Sure, yeah, and that particularly, and that brings me on to another one of my current interests, which is the overlap between neurodivergence and addiction generally. Okay. But I'm very interested at the moment between addiction and ADHD because I've tried to look at people who constantly relapse. In fact, I've been one of them over the decades. Now, I know that I don't personally have ADHD because I had a full assessment back in 2009, and my issue that kind of prompted or ran alongside my personal problems with addiction was the childhood trauma and the anxiety, the amygdala being permanently activated. And you could see that by my drug choices because they were always depressant drugs. So my kind of drugs of choice were, alcohol, benzodiazepines, and opioids. Right. You couldn't have given me cocaine at the point of a gun. Well, maybe you could, but yeah, I would watch other people who would, for example, smoke crack cocaine, and they would calm down. Bizarre. I found that bizarre. They would take a stimulant drug like crack cocaine or amphetamine, and they would calm down. So for a long time, I'm thinking, what's all that about? Now, of course, in terms of relapse, people, it's a pejorative term, serial relapser, chronic relapser. But anybody who's been around the 12-step world will know that people go round and round and round. And so not just me, a few of us, few colleagues started. I wonder if ADHD, untreated ADHD, can explain some of this. So we've started, one of the projects we're looking at now is looking at people who are in 12-step. And now this is quite controversial, Rich, but I think for some people. But for people who are in sustained 12-step recovery, but who are on medication for ADHD, so methylphenidate, Ritalin. Right. Now, of course, for a lot of us, old school, we think, whoa, that's a relapse. If you're in Narcotics Anonymous and you're taking amphetamine, that's amphetamine. At the end of the day, man, that's amphetamine. But I spent a week in Budapest, Hungary, 2 weeks ago with a guy he's 8 years clean and sober, who is one of these. He's a different man. He's a completely different man. And but but there are people still who are saying, oh, he's still using really. But his life is, I mean, I watched him when he was unmedicated and in and out of recovery. The guy's, he's got married, children, amazing, transformational, but again, those who want to have a war would say, oh, he's relapsed, so that's my, in fact, that is almost becoming an obsession, Rich.
Okay.
It's a bit like,
you said something very interesting. Very interesting to me.
Is it called confirmation bias, where you don't see a yellow car and then you buy a yellow car and all you ever see are yellow cars.
Yeah. What about abstinence? And I think this is a good point you made. Abstinence-based recovery is cheap. And that's something we're all, everything is always dollars and cents. But you say abstinence-based recovery is cheap.
Yeah, well, this is so the politics of when I was in Public Health England in central government. One of the things, whilst some of the people who balked at the notion of abstinence-based recovery, and they particularly balked at 12-step abstinence-based recovery because of the mention of God in Alcoholics Anonymous literature, because that world is very scientific, is very very secular, and the separate, they didn't like that. So being ever the opportunist, I said, well, if people can make their way into abstinence-based recovery and they can sustain it through, for example, regular attendance at the 12-step fellowships, they don't cost the state any money anymore, and then they go into jobs, friends, and houses.
Right.
Okay. And so, so what's not to like? So suddenly a lot of that's why I say a phony war. Some psychiatrists and others who were, perhaps understandably skeptical about this God-based thing, this spiritual thing, because it doesn't have science. There isn't a randomized controlled trial, it's it's all a bit mysterious. But then when you said, but it's not free. People need to go to a detox probably, and they need maybe some period of time in a rehabilitation center. But that's a one-off payment, a one-off capital investment, if you will. Right. And then, obviously one or two will relapse and come back around. But you're investing, so you're taking somebody who, when they're drinking and using on the street in the UK, they'll almost certainly be on welfare. Yeah. So they will be taking money. They will be taking tax dollars from the national purse. Okay. You spend a little bit of money, and you spend, I don't know, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on them, whatever, detox, rehab, some treatment, and then you recoup that back in the first year because they go back to work.
Right.
Jobs, friends, houses.
Jobs, friends, right? The big three.
Jobs, friends, and houses. Yeah.
Mark, in our time left, I want you to take some time and just tell me, in your opinion, what is the state of harm reduction in the UK right now, as far as and let me know. What do you think? We're doing good here? We think we're doing poorly? Tell me what's going on with harm reduction in the US, because in the United States we're a little shaky on it right now, and some of the top government officials are reducing funding for groups with it. And right now we're a little shaky on it. Where are you guys at in the UK with that?
Yeah, well, we have a similar kind of debate. It is a bit like remember the old soldier, with the Japanese soldier who wanted to carry on fighting the war after it's been over because they've been in a jungle for that long. There are some people who just want to fight. That said, I'm pretty much in the UK now. It's a good balance. There are outliers. There are people who want to have a fight. But if you did a standard distribution curve, I think most people now have coalesced to recognize, keep people alive. The biggest threat at the UK now is drug-related deaths, particularly in Scotland, sadly. You know, we're really struggling with drug-related deaths, and obviously part of that is to do with synthetic opioids. You have fentanyl. We have a thing called nitazene, similar synthetic opioid, very, very strong, very difficult to produce harm reduction measures to counter it because they're just so strong. We also have, it's very gendered. The drug-related deaths are gendered. It's not always exclusive, but it's disproportionately men. Mm-hmm. It's disproportionately working class men, poor men, you know, without unemployed, you know, etc., isolated. You know, you can almost, sadly, you can almost guess when you've been around a long time who's at very, very high risk of. People become, you know, I mean, I'm of a certain age now where I look around, they're almost equivocal about life. You know, they're not. I spoke to one guy recently in Scotland and I said, "Are you suicidal?" And I won't do the accent, Scottish accent. He said, "No, I'm not suicidal. I just don't care whether I wake up or not." And I said, "Is there a difference?" And he said, "Yeah, but if I wanted to kill myself, I'd kill myself." He said, "But you've just taken, I've just watched you drink alcohol, take an opioid, take a benzodiazepine, you know, in liberal quantities. There's every chance you won't wake up." He said, "If I don't wake up, I don't wake up." You know, and it sounds a bit, it certainly looks like parasuicidal behavior. There's the really sad thing to report from the UK, which is not a commentary on UK harm reduction in terms of drugs. It's just the state of the UK nation. There is, you know, the health inequalities are getting worse. Okay. We used to say that a boy born in several parts of the UK would have a better life chance if he were born in Basra or North Korea. And that's getting worse. That's getting worse. So the life expectancy of the poorest men and indeed women, although it's gendered more towards men, is now 2 years less than it was 10 years ago.
Wow. Okay.
So you're put in summary, Rich, the harm reduction, the context within which harm reduction operates is in a context where life expectancy, because of just the way society is going the wrong way.
Right. So harm reduction is finding itself, as we know, closely tethered to healthcare in general. You know, healthcare is going poor, and then harm reduction is going to go down with it.
Yeah,
that's great. Mark, I want to thank you for taking some time.
Pleasure.
Come down here and come and talk to me about this. I find it very interesting how people from, you know, around the world are dealing with this problem. Sadly to say, for me, that doesn't really matter who you talk to. The situation is pretty much dire everywhere for the most part. And even though we do make gains and we do make strides,
sure,
but all in all, it's a heavy weight to carry. But, you know, kind of glad we got, you know, people like yourself who have been this from the beginning and sort of, you know, or staying diligent and staying working. So if nobody else will thank you, I'll thank you.
Thank you, brother.
I really appreciate that. In closing, before we go, I just want to remind everybody, if you are a frontline practitioner, okay, you want to help families with a non-clinical program that helps them cut through the friction of real-life events and detrimental effects of an unfocused support network, restorativelifemanagement.com. You go there and we will help you, especially, and start getting you into a program, getting some of your client families in the program. Okay, Mark, again, thank you very much for being here. It's been a pleasure. I'll try to keep up with you, see what you're doing. I find it very interesting. I told you all about the brick box and acorn thing, so I'm sort of watching you all the time anyway. So keep an eye on it. I want to remind everybody, for me and Mark, let's get out there and help somebody get better, help somebody stay better, and most importantly, let's help somebody be better. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you, Rich. God bless you.